we'd like to introduce Casey on our team, who will introduce our special guest today.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So Chris has already kind of given a little bit of a taster of this, but we have a special guest today for Vault Hours. This is Oliver Needham, who is calling all the way from the UK, where he works as an event production company called Storm Events as a virtual events and IT administrator, so managing that event coordination, but then also company password management with Bitwarden. And I really had the pleasure of speaking with Oliver fairly recently for a security champion case study where he shared such an interesting experience as a Bitwarden personal user who brought Bitwarden to his workplace. So very similar to a story I'm sure a lot of you on this call are aware of. And so we invited Oliver to Vault Hours today just to speak about a little bit more about his story, his experience with Bitwarden, and especially, bringing it into his workplace, those two very different use cases for Bitwarden and what that experience was like. Did I miss anything, Oliver? Anything else you'd
No,
like to add to that
no,
quick
I think that
introduction?
you've got that all there. Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's yeah, great to be here. I've
Yeah.
watched a few of these before, and as Casey says, it was great to kind of speak to you before and kind of share my story. So yeah, really happy to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that you're here. So, I guess kind of going back to the beginning, one of my first questions is what made Bitwarden really stand out for securing, passwords in your personal life? Is there anything about Bitwarden that drew you in that aspect?
Yeah, so originally I used a password manager. I was a beta tester for a VPN that they used. They kind of brought out a password manager product. The product no longer exists, by the way. But I saw an article from a technologist in the radio broadcast industry who kind of shared how he was using Bitwarden and kind of drew me in of like, oh, okay, that's something a bit different, a bit better than what I was previously using. And the killer features for me from where I was previously was kind of the desktop apps were much better, and also one-time passwords were in the app rather than having to use another third-party app to get them. The price, as someone has already put in the chat, the price of kind of an individual was really attractive, and actually hasn't changed for me in 4 years. It's been $10 ever since I've been part of this. So don't put it up. It's really great value, and yeah, so it was kind of really easy for me to go right. Let's move over to it. Got my wife on board, and yeah, we've been using it ever since.
I love that. I think a lot of people on this call as well have that similar experience of, adopting Bitwarden for themselves and then bringing family members on board as well. I've done that with my fiance, and, I think in earlier Vault Hours as well, we've shared a little bit about trying to get all the other family members on board just because you're only as secure as your weakest link, especially whenever you're sharing passwords like that.
Exactly, and because often me and my wife have conversations about what other people doing, other couples in our lives, and we're like, how do they get by without having a shared calendar and having a shared password manager?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I can definitely attest to that as well. So I mean, that was kind of like how you started using it in your personal life, right? But you are clearly very much involved in the IT aspect of your job as well. So, in your position at Storm Events, how were they managing passwords beforehand? What did that look like?
So originally, yeah, I joined in 2021 Storm Events. It's been just over 3 years since I've been here, and it was kind of a combination of spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets, classic, and also Monday.com boards. That's how they were managing a lot of the information when I joined. And coming from a previous technical job, kind of in the radio industry, we were using kind of a secure password file with a different product. But it was at least one central place that we could all access that password or those passwords that we needed to share. So it was quite painful, if I'm honest, coming and experiencing that. But um, totally going that's how people use it. If you don't know difference, sometimes that's what you do, and it gets you by. But it was definitely an opportunity that I saw kind of coming in and going. I think this is something that we can probably improve.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially two different locations for that kind of non-syncing passwords, like both a Monday.com board and a spreadsheet. That's just not something that's going to be accessible most of the time. I hope everyone on the call, it sounds like we have a lot of personal users, but in your, day-to-day work lives, I really hope that that's not how you're managing passwords because it gives me a little bit of a heart attack even just to think about. So, I mean, clearly there was a problem, right? You came in, you could see that that was not the best way to do that. So what made you think that Bitwarden might be a good fit to kind of solve that problem of managing passwords at storm events?
So I think it's that classic thing of everyone's trying to do the right thing to start with, and it was right that the passwords were being managed in some way, even if it wasn't the most easiest. And we were also looking at a lot of information security in the company and going, we want to improve those side of things as well. So building all of that in, we could go right in a policy somewhere it says you should use a password manager. So let's have a look at, can we corporately provide a password manager? Was one of the questions that I had, and I was using it personally, even for work purposes, to kind of put a collection together or put a folder and say, right, these are all my work passwords that I need to manage. So let's look at that. And I knew that if it was making things easier in my personal life, it would make things easier at work. So it was just a case of, let's give it a go and let's see what happens if I ask.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting that you mentioned that because I was talking to another customer recently who also started using Bitwarden at work, but not really telling anyone, right? Just started to kind of manage their own passwords that way. And IT saw it on as an extension on their work laptop and reached out saying like, "Hey, does this actually work? You know, like we're investigating password managers." And that was kind of how it was adopted within their organization. So that kind of shadow IT, right, just kind of adopting it on your own is like a really, I don't know, at least in my opinion, a very interesting way to bring it onto your team. But it happens a lot
With
more
my
frequently.
InfoSec hat on, I will always say use the things that your IT provide for a reason.
Yeah.
My other hat is very much, I got a note to say this, is kind of as a cheeky move. If your company is saying you should use a password manager, ask them, will you provide me one then? And you can then at that point have a door of going, I use Bitwarden in my personal life. I find it's a great thing. Why not give this a go? And I've done that in previous companies and kind of hit a brick wall. Here, it was very much, I was in a position as well where I could kind of push it and bring people around and kind of go, yeah, let's give this a go all together. You don't always get that. Totally get loads of different organizations, different things. But I think it's a kind of a way to go, you would like us to do these things securely. Let's just take a look at this and see what we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you kind of suggested that to the team, what were some key things that really, threw them in? Like what really convinced them that this might be a good solution to even test out?
So yeah, when I was kind of recommending Bitwarden, it was bringing. I had a pitch essentially. I'd gone all those things that I just said. Use it in my personal life. Why not try and use it here? And we knew we were doing these things, and I took it kind of to the person that was looking after the information security at the time, and one of our directors, and basically made a business case, just a one pager of this is why we should use it. And I got together a few people who had expressed interest in that, and kind of that was the important thing for me with that was a mixture of people who'd used password management before and people that hadn't. So we had people who had been using other products in their personal lives and people that had no clue, maybe just saving everything in the browser. So it meant that I could kind of bring them on, and I ended up using the term Bitward Guardians, that they were people that would come on, help and me administrate for a start, making sure I wasn't the only person that was kind of doing this, and then bring them along for the ride so then they could advocate for it in other parts of the business as well. I manually imported a lot of the initial logins and credentials from various different places, and then over a course of kind of a month got those people that I'd initially brought on to do it together, give feedback. We were in good conversations. We're giving each other hints and tips of things that we discovered. So that was really, really cool. And then essentially building that on, bringing more people in, and then essentially running out to the whole company and going, this is what we're going to do. Had a page on the internet that I'd created saying, these are the ways to use it, or these are best practices. So it was kind of really easy to get going once I'd got that core group really using it in their day-to-day life or their daily lives. Also going where it was a problem, where there were things that weren't so easy for whatever reason, and kind of going, can we do this? How can we do that? It meant that I could improve some of the policies we're using and things like that. So yeah, it was a really good experience for me of bringing people and bringing people along for that.
Yeah, it sounds like having that kind of like that team in your corner was like a really key part of the onboarding process was being able to problem solve and, convince the rest of the company, the benefits of it, especially with people in different kinds of roles. That's really cool to kind of hear people coming together in terms of better password security. It's definitely a thing to bond over, considering we also have this vault hours where people just talk about different ways to secure your passwords. So I love that. So since kind of like doing that whole onboarding process, right, and getting everyone at Storm Events to adopt a password manager solution like Bitwarden, have you noticed anything that has changed within the organization about just making your security posture stronger? Is there anything that kind of any other poor password practices that were uncovered during this onboarding process, and now that you're actually using Bitwarden productively?
So there was, we used some of the reports that are available to kind of go, we've got duplicate passwords all over the place. So let's nip that in the bud. We've got Bitwarden, we can generate passwords. I don't know 90% of my passwords, as all the other Bitwarden users know. You know maybe a handful that you do have to type out manually because you can't copy paste for whatever reason, and your master password. Everything else is just in Bitwarden. And so I'm finding that with my colleagues as well. Very similar. They'll know a few passwords really well, and their passphrases typically, which is even better because we've got in my kind of infosec hats, I also do all the infosec training, so been able to kind of push that through there. And again, that whole thing of, if you're say you're going to use a password manager, provide one, but also here's good password practices at the same time. And so that's really come through, and I've been really pleased with the kind of results of what we've done with that over the past year in particular. Other thing is onboarding of individuals is so much easier. This month I've had to onboard 3 people alone, taking us to kind of 40 users in total, which means that I've had to introduce them to Bitwarden, but they've got it really quickly. And I go, these are the passwords that you need. You'll find them here. And then using the kind of the groups and collections, I've been able to give the right users the right passwords at the right time. They don't need everything all at once. They can get them all kind of piecemeal. So yeah, those have been really good. And I think accountability in terms of when a password needs to change. We do need to change passwords occasionally because there are systems that require us to do so. And then we can kind of share that information really quickly. Just say, hey, we've updated this bunch of passwords rather than just 2 or 3, 15 at a time. Sync your vaults if you haven't already, and off you go. So those sort of things have been really useful, and people are just a lot more aware of those sort of passwords. And I'm asked to create a password which can be easily typed out. It's not just let me in, for example. It's got other characters in and what have you, but they're aware that it needs to be a bit more complicated. One of I see Gently has put a question in there, kind of asking if we're using hardware keys. I am the only user that is using a hardware key, and the reason for that is we found that just our nature of being an events business, we need to just get things done. And one of the positions I take in our security kind of posture is the balance of being able to get things done versus being secure at the same time. So that example of being able to read a password out to somebody because they can't copy paste, they're like a freelancer or something like that. So I need to give them a password, and it needs to be secure, but it can't be overly complicated. So adding hardware keys in makes that a lot more difficult for us, unfortunately, just to get things to them. We've not found that we've had any issues with kind of the master password, and I know we've got the whole thing about on a new device you'll have to do an email one-time passcode type thing. I think all of those things keep us secure, and we kind of accept any of the other risks that come along with it. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question gently in the chat.
I mean, yeah, having that balance, right, of security and productivity. I think having an enterprise password manager helps with that. Absolutely. It kind of straddles that line, right? But it's also important to have a good understanding of your own security posture and what's going to make things easier for your users while still maintaining really secure password practices. Okay, looks like there's a couple things in the chat. I'm just gonna finish it off with the last question for you. You have been absolutely fantastic answering all of these questions from us. But lastly, do you have anything you would recommend for any kind of personal users who are thinking that maybe Bitwarden or a enterprise password manager might be a good fit for their organization? Do you have any recommendations for them that you'd like to share?
Yeah, kind of a few things there. So as kind of mentioned, share how it's improved your personal life. You know, that you've only got one place to look for all your passwords, and you're not having to worry about that too much. The other thing I mentioned that I kind of look after our InfoSec training is that it's not just when we do that InfoSec training, it's not just kind of protecting the company, but it's protecting the individuals. We do that training to help people in their personal lives. So why wouldn't you encourage people to look after their passwords in their personal life much better as a whole company? And yeah, I found that it has made people think about that more in their personal lives. So I think that's a great pitch that you can do. Mentioned it already, bring a few people along for the journey. It's always great to have kind of allegiance in the company of other people that are with you along that. And as I suggested, if you want to push it into your organization, ask, and you've got a security policy somewhere that says you need a password manager, ask them, will you provide one? Suggest Bitwarden along the way. It feels a bit cheeky at times. I've definitely had that thrown at me before, but I think it's reasonable to kind of ask these questions sometimes.
Absolutely. And might I add as well, for enterprise plans as well, you are able to sponsor family organizations for individual users. So if you're at a company that already uses Bitwarden or is thinking of adopting Bitwarden, you can also benefit from that in your personal life, right? And your users, your other employees within the organization can benefit of just better password security in their personal life. Spouses, teenagers seems to be a problem in the chat, but like children, right? Like that kind of thing is just really helpful to have that blueprint for password security. But
Get
thank
some of
you
the points
so
there
much.
about the physical key. I keep mine
Yeah.
on this lanyard, which has a fob, which means I can't get into the building. So if I can't get into work, I can't do secure stuff at the same time. So yeah, I've got a YubiKey like people have mentioned in the chat, and it's never not on me. If I can't get into work, I've got a bigger problem going on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's like a really good segue. Also, we always recommend if you use hardware keys, right, especially like YubiKeys, you want to have a backup, right? So keep that in a secure place. If you have it on your lanyard, maybe have a different one at home or somewhere in a separate location, just that way you don't completely lock yourself out. Very similar to having a spare key to your house, right? Like that's something that's pretty darn important. But yeah, keep the conversation going in the chat regarding hardware keys. Any other questions you have for Oliver as well? I'm sure you'll be on for maybe a couple more minutes. So feel free to answer questions in the chat. But I think everyone say like we really appreciate you hopping on. If you also want to learn more about Oliver's story, we have our security champion spotlight case study detailing all the nitty gritty details of his experience on the Bitwarden website. So I can also add a link to that as well.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Oliver, so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time, especially since you're across the pond. Really appreciate it, and it was really very interesting to learn your journey from personal Bitwarden use to bringing it to your company.